Well, good evening once again. And we will go ahead and get started now. If you are just coming in, we welcome you to come find a seat as you're able. Well, let me welcome you to tonight's talk. This is a series of talks, the DLitt talks that we have, and our distinguished guest tonight is Professor Robert George, who I will introduce more formally here in just a moment. But let me begin by just saying a word of thank you. Thank you to you for participating. We know many of you have demanding schedules. There are a number of things that you could be doing besides being here tonight. And so we are appreciative of you investing by coming and being a part of tonight and showing up and attending. Secondly, I want to thank those who have financially made a night like this possible. So there are some donors that are here that have helped sponsor this event. I want to say a particular word, though, to board members for DLitt. So I've seen several of you. I saw Tom Trop and Roger Christoph, Kendall Mills, and Harold Smith. So just want to thank them for the work that they do and allow us to think about things like we get to do tonight. One of the driving convictions behind what the DLitt Institute is and how we got started is that we really believe that we're in a moment where there's a crisis of wisdom. There's a tsunami of information that people are drowning in, and at the same time, we see a decrease in some common sense and in a life of wisdom, specifically wisdom as God has designed the world. And so we are participating in pushing back against some of those things, and events like tonight are an investment to that degree. Proverbs says that wisdom is better than gold, that insight is actually more valuable than silver. And so the investment that you're making tonight to learn and to seek wisdom is a way that you are growing in that together. There are a number of programs and initiatives that DLitt does to this end. I'll tell you about two of them briefly. One, we have just published our first guidebook, so we're excited about this. We've been working on this for a while, and Mike Woodruff, if you're new to the community, Mike Woodruff is the senior pastor of Christ Church, but he serves as the chairman of the DLitt board, and he's the author of the first guidebook. It's called On the News, and if you haven't received a digital copy of this, if you scan the QR code right in front of you, it'll take you right to a page, and we have a free digital copy for you tonight. But in short, we know that news and media is shaping the way that people not just see the world, but who they are becoming as people. It's changing their souls, it's changing their relationships, and this resource is intended to help you navigate through news and media by understanding it better, understanding how it's shaping you, and how you can actually navigate through that. So that's a free resource for you. Secondly, we have a class coming up. So we offer classes each semester. There's a new class starting next Wednesday night. And I'm actually going to be the professor on this one. The first time I've taught a class in the first 2.5 years of this. It's called Christ and Culture. It's a 4-week class, so it's really short. And we are addressing not just the current moment, but really how is it that you're called to be a faithful Christian witness in whatever place God has called you to. So understanding the types of approaches that Christians have had to culture and how to move forward on that. So I told Professor George this right before we started. I have expanded this class from 4 weeks to 5 weeks, and this is the first week of the class. So tonight, you're all participating in the first week. That means two things. One, you're 20% done with the class by the time you finish tonight, if you show up next Wednesday night. And secondly, I am now a co-faculty member with Professor George in teaching a class, so I'm going to add that to my CV. Yeah, that's exactly right. It may not show up on his, but it will show up on mine. That is my transition to introducing our guest tonight. Professor George is the McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton. In 2000, he founded the James Madison program, which you'll hear a little bit more about tonight as well. But I want to read off a couple of things just to make sure that you have a chance to know who he is and ways that God has used him through his career. He served at Princeton for 40 years now, but as the chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, he served on the President's Council for Bioethics as well, a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. He was awarded the United States Presidential Citizens Medal as well. He's the author of numerous books. In 2001, wrote a book called The Clash of Orthodoxies and came to my university the year later and spoke at the university, so I had a chance actually to hear him over 20 years ago when he just came out with that significant work. In addition to studying at Harvard and at Oxford degrees in those places, he's been awarded 23 honorary degrees as well. And in addition to that, he is a fantastic banjo player. And I had a chance tonight to hear actually some of his banjo music. So YouTube will serve you well. Jump online, you can listen to that as well. He has been called a consultant to both popes and presidents. And as his current executive assistant said, he's no longer, not to the current pope or the current president is he serving in those roles, but in the past, that has been part of the role that Professor George has played in the landscape of American both political life and religious life. So please join me in welcoming Robert George and Mike Woodruff.
Well, so the question is, will you add that you co-taught a class with Ben Dockery to your CV? Thank you for being here. I know you have many demands on your time. We appreciate a chance to reflect with you on a number of things. So I did read your CV. I read the 2-page version, which I'm assuming is the edited version, and it was... I was exhausted reading it, but thank you for all that you have done. 2 things jumped out at me. The first is that there are a number of things that were not on there. One of the more remarkable things that you've done, and we'll get to this later, but you have been an outspoken, conservative, Catholic, public intellectual at a university, and you have not just survived, you've thrived, and you've made friends, and you've been part of the university's life. And that's a skill, and that's something to be reflected on. It doesn't say here that you're a husband and a father and a grandfather and a banjo player, things that I'm sure would be high on your list of things that add value to your life. But the second thing that struck me about your CV was, this is like your moment. You have been studying politics and political theory and virtue and society and free speech and freedom of religion and all of these things. I mean, 2024 is your year. Oh. So we're looking for answers in the next hour to...
Vanity of vanities, all is vanity.
So I have a number of very specific questions, and we will open it up to the floor. You can text in questions. I think you got that note. But I have a number of very specific questions that drive down on the First Amendment and freedom of speech and higher education and other things. But let's start 30,000 feet. How are you feeling about this moment? There are 2 narratives out there. There's a narrative that says, stock market has never been higher, unemployment is low, we are fixing things, the air is cleaner, the water is purer, we're seeing crime come down, Elon Musk landed a rocket back in a launch pad. Things are getting better. That's one narrative. And there's another narrative that says, this is a very fragile moment, everything is spinning apart. We have 2 hot wars, we have 1 Cold War, we have massive debt, people are depressed and they're anxious and they're polarized, and it's very fragile. So which of those, I mean, there's obviously truth to both of those narratives, but what narrative do you lean into?
Well, I'll be happy to answer that question, but if I may, could I have a moment first to just say a couple of preliminary things. One, Ben Dockery said that it falls to me to announce that we're having a pop quiz this evening. So get your pencils out and get ready. I do want to thank you, Mike, and I want to thank Ben, and I want to thank the board of the Lake Light Institute for this opportunity to be here. And I also want to say how much I appreciate the work that the Institute does. And for that, I also, of course, want to thank my friends Bob and Mimi Murley for their involvement. I want to say, secondly, that I came by my banjo playing honestly. I was born and brought up in the hills of West Virginia, so...
There's folklore out there that you showed up as an undergrad barefoot with a banjo on your back.
That is true. The barefoot part is merely metaphorical, but the banjo on my back was literal. Yeah, I showed up at Swarthmore College as an undergraduate with the banjo on my back. I did.
Well, and this got glossed over. So 10 years later, 15 years later, you've graduated from college, you've graduated from Harvard Law School, and you have a PhD in some sort of theory of law from
Philosophy
Oxford.
of law.
Philosophy of law.
From Oxford.
That's a long way from West Virginia.
It's still my home. If anyone asks me where I come from or where I live, I just instinctively say West Virginia. I may have left it temporarily, but it hasn't left me. Yeah, that's exactly right. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, everyone, for coming out this evening. Okay, so what's the good news? Jesus is Lord. That's the good news. What's the bad news? Man is fallen. Bad news. It's the same good news and bad news that we have throughout human history, and until Jesus comes back, that will be the good news and the bad news. So we have grounds for being hopeful, and we must be hopeful. Hope isn't optimism. Optimism is a matter of optics. Hope is a virtue. Hope is an active thing. And we have grounds for hope. Ultimately, our grounds are in Jesus. But it's our obligation to be hopeful. But, of course, at the same time, there are grounds for us to be very worried about the world, and indeed the country, that we will be passing on to our children and grandchildren. Mike mentioned that I'm now, among other things, a grandfather. That's very new for me. Our son and daughter-in-law have given us a little boy who's now 18 months, and our daughter and son-in-law have given us a little girl who's now 8 months, and we have one on the way. But this is new, this grandfather bit. And for those of you who haven't experienced grandparenthood, I'll just say it's absolutely everything it's cracked up to be. Can't happen fast enough. But it has given me a big investment in the future. And although I am always hopeful, I'm very worried. I'm very worried about the moral fiber of the country and more broadly, the culture. We've gone down some very, very bad roads. We have fundamentally lost, as a culture, that principle, that most basic principle of all morality, and that is the principle of the profound, inherent, and equal dignity of each and every member of the human family. That comes to us as the fruit of that revelation that is presented in the very first chapter of the very first book of the Bible, where we're taught that man, though fashioned from the mere dust of the earth, mere material stuff, is nevertheless made in the very image and likeness of the divine creator and ruler of all that is. So we're very low and capable of very bad things, but we're also very high, children of God, made in the very image and likeness of God. But the ethical principle, as I say, that's drawn from that idea of the Imago Dei, that revelation of the Imago Dei, is one that we have more or less abandoned. We've abandoned it in the domain of the sanctity of human life. Look at the issue of abortion in our culture today. It's considered a losing issue to stand up for the sanctity of human life, to speak in defense of the precious but vulnerable, innocent child in the womb. We have one party's nominee running precisely as the candidate who will protect abortion through the entire period of gestation and for any reason, and another candidate's nominee who wants to avoid the issue and talk about anything else. That is not good. That tells us something about the condition of our culture. Look at our marriage situation in our culture. That is very bleak. Our marriage rates are down. Anybody surprised about that? Anybody surprised at the family dissolution rates? We've even redefined the very idea of marriage, replacing the conjugal understanding of marriage as the union of husband and wife with a basic understanding of, quote, marriage as simple sexual romantic companionship or domestic partnership that can be entered into by two people of the same sex as well as opposite sexes, But by the same token, by 3 people, by 5 people, by 7 people in so-called polyamorous units. And every major elite newspaper, magazine, website in the country is doing its part now to mainstream polyamory, multiple partner units. New York Times, New Yorker, New York Magazine, Los Angeles Times, all the major progressive websites. This is a tough situation. This is not the world we want for our children and our grandchildren. But does that mean we despair? No, we don't despair, because Jesus is king and because we have hope. But having hope, again, is an active thing. It's not a virtue. It's not optimism. It's not predicting that things are going to get better. It's going out there and making things better. Inspired by the example of Jesus himself, the suffering servant, that spirit of self-sacrifice, to go out and bear faithful witness to the principles that can restore our culture to something at least approaching a culture that honors that principle of the profound, inherent, and equal dignity of each and every member of the human family.
So let me ask if you would run for a little bit with, I've heard you or read you on American exceptionalism. So you're framing things, Genesis 1, we're highly valued, Genesis 3, we're deeply fallen, we're greatly loved. We're to have hope even if we can't have optimism. And you're looking at that globally. Reflect a little bit on America and what makes you, why you love America. And I'm going to ask you what's wrong with America, but talk about American exceptionalism for a minute.
Yeah, American exceptionalism is a much misunderstood concept, or more properly speaking, ideal. Sometimes people will hear the phrase American exceptionalism, and this is true especially historically of people on the left, will hear the phrase American exceptionalism and will take offense to it because they interpret it as meaning a kind of American arrogance. We're beating our chests and saying, oh, how wonderful we are. We're unlike the rest of the world. You know, we're like the Pharisee in the story that Jesus tells with the publican. Oh, Lord, I'm glad I'm not like this other guy. Oh, Lord, I'm glad as an American I'm not like this Frenchman or this Chinese person. That has nothing to do with what it means. American exceptionalism is not about us being intrinsically better than other people. We're made out of the same material stuff, the same flesh and blood, afflicted by the same fallenness as any other people on earth. American exceptionalism has to do with this. Our fundamental sources of strength as a nation and our basic unity is not rooted in common bonds of blood or soil or throne and altar. Historically, societies have had their strength and unity rooted in those kinds of things: a common ethnicity, a common religion, a common shared cultural background. But Americans come from everywhere. If you didn't come from somewhere other than America, your father did, or if you're not your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather. Even the bluest blood of the bluest blooded Americans is European or of other ancestry. So if our unity and our sources of strength are not in bonds of blood and soil or throne and altar, what are they in? Here's what makes America exceptional. They're in a common commitment to a shared set of moral political beliefs and commitments. They're in a shared allegiance, despite our differences of race, ethnicity, religion, cultural background, a common shared commitment to the principle that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We must never treat that second sentence of the Declaration of Independence as a cliche. It is not a cliche. When that was articulated by Jefferson in the committee that he led on behalf of the American revolutionaries, it was a radical, novel idea, shocking, that all men are created equal, not classes and castes. kings and dukes and earls and counts and barons, that we're endowed by God himself with certain unalienable rights, not only the rich and the powerful and the strong, but the weak and the vulnerable and the poor. A radical idea, and yet that's our idea. And it remains our ideal. It's what binds us together. I don't know if someone can become really a Frenchman. You can probably become a French citizen and get a French passport. Can you become Japanese? Well, you can. Maybe there's a way to get a Japanese passport and Japanese citizenship if you're not Japanese. But those would be exceptional. Those would be unusual.
I think only 400 non-Japanese have become Japanese.
Become Japanese in all of history, right? In America, it's the norm. You can come from anywhere. My friend here, I just met, his ancestors come from Lebanon, where some of my ancestors came from, or Syria. His wife comes from on one side from Germany, on the other side from Lebanon. We come from China, we come from Africa, we come from India. What binds us together? How do we not spin apart? We're not the same religion, we're not the same ethnicity, we're not the same race, we're not the same cultural background. It's that shared commitment for as long as we have it. We could translate that famous sentence uttered by Benjamin Franklin coming out of the Constitutional Convention when the woman confronted him, "What kind of government have you given us, Mr. Franklin?"
A republic,
Dr. Franklin.
if
A republic if you can keep it. We can translate that into a republic if you remain faithful to that principle that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And that's a lot more important than your race, your ethnicity, even your religion. What makes you an American is not that you're Protestant or Catholic or Jewish or Buddhist or Hindu or Muslim or anything else. It's not that you're black, white, red, yellow. It has nothing to do with any of those things. It has to do with your commitment to that basic principle.
So can we hold on to that principle? Yuval Levin has some new book out on that the Constitution can hold, and the Constitution was made for a moment like this. I haven't read it. I think it's part of this 250th anniversary series, and it makes me wonder. I've never wondered before. Will the Constitution hold? I'm not asking if you're hopeful. I'm asking, are you optimistic that we can see a 300th anniversary as a country?
I did read Yuval Levin's book, and for anyone who doesn't know who Yuval Levin is, he's someone you should know about and whose works you should acquaint yourself with. He's a scholar. He's a 40-something-year-old scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, one of the most brilliant people writing in the entire United States, probably the most in the entire world today. He's just a wonderful thinker. I had the pleasure of getting to know him when he was a young staffer on President Bush's U.S. President's Council on Bioethics when I was serving on the council under the chairmanship of the great Leon Cass, and watching Yuval develop into the absolutely brilliant scholar that he is today has been a magnificent thing. I read the book in order to provide a promotional blurb for the book, and it's brilliant, and I found it persuasive. I think our Constitution can hold. But look, people, a Constitution is not something that is self-actualizing. If we don't act for it, if we don't uphold it, if we don't defend it, it's just words on a page. Any of you familiar with the Soviet Constitution? Justice Scalia, Antonin Scalia, used to carry around a copy of the Soviet Constitution in a little pamphlet version in his pocket. And he would open it for an audience and he would read it. And it talks about the ringing terms about the protection of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly. Sounded like our Bill of Rights. It sounded like a wonderful Constitution. But it was just parchment. Those were just parchment guarantees. There was no freedom of speech in the Soviet Union. There was definitely no freedom of religion in the Soviet Union. It was an authoritarian, totalitarian police state. And yet it had as good a constitution when it came to pronouncements of civil liberty as our Constitution. The difference is Americans historically have been willing to fight for their Constitution. We overcame the great evils in our history by remembering our Constitution and our Declaration, Lincoln, in the fight against slavery, in the fight against secession, would constantly go back and recall those words I quoted to you from the second sentence of the Declaration that we all know by heart. Remember the opening words of the second inaugural address. We're a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Martin Luther King, when he was leading the struggle for civil rights, he didn't say, America's bad, America has a bad constitution, we need a revolution. We need a new constitution. He didn't say that at all. He said, in that declaration and in that constitution, we wrote a check, and we need to be faithful to it. We need to back that check. We need to support that. We need to make good on that commitment, that check that we wrote. And that should be our constant theme. When it comes to all the areas now needing reform in our society, our lodestar, our guide, our, use another metaphor, our keystone, our touchstone should be the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution. We have never gone wrong in this country when. We've never had reason to be ashamed of ourselves when we've been faithful to those principles. It's when we have been unfaithful, beginning with slavery, absolutely inconsistent with the Declaration. Jefferson himself a slaveholder. One of the great tragedies, one of the great ironies, dark ironies of history. A slaveholder like Jefferson could nevertheless write those ringing, stirring words. By the way, that inconsistency, that contradiction was not missed by some of Jefferson's critics, people like John Adams. They didn't make a big deal of it because they had a country to put together. But they noticed that inconsistency. But we've never been ashamed of ourselves or had reason to be ashamed of ourselves because we were too faithful to our principles. Where we've gone wrong and where we have reason to be ashamed of our history is when we've been unfaithful to those principles.
So you're admonishing us to go back to the Constitution and arguing that the Constitution is part of what makes us a nation and exceptional and it's unique and it's great. It's common today to say that we are we're not as polarized as we've ever been. The Civil War was worse, and maybe the 60s were worse. But it's a bad moment. And there are people now talking about we need a new constitutional convention, or we need to rethink some of these things, and we've got some of these things wrong.
On both sides, you have people talking about a national divorce.
Right. Right.
And this brings us back, to before the Civil War. This brings us back to the early part of the 19th century, the 1800s. We're not quite in as bad a polarized condition as we were during the Civil War, but we are in just about as bad a situation as the one we were in when it came to polarization in 1800, where the country was almost lost. Some of you undoubtedly know the history, so I won't be breaking any news, but for others who happen not to know this, it was a real question, an open question, whether if the Democratic Republicans under Jefferson defeated the Federalists led by Adams, who was the sitting president, in the election of 1800, it was an open question whether the Federalists would give up power, whether we would have a peaceful transfer of power in this very unusual and new thing, a democratic republic. The country could have failed and almost failed right then. If you go back and look at the newspapers of the time, for example, the viciousness of the Democratic Republicans against the Federalists and vice versa was very similar to what we have today, with one party calling the other party's candidate a communist and the other party calling the other party's candidate a Nazi, and all this insanity. That's what we had. That's what we had in 1800. Fortunately, we survived it, but it was a close-run thing and by no means a foregone conclusion. So if we're going to survive it in the future, if we're going to survive this instantiation of it, we have good reasons for hope, even some reasons for optimism. Levin articulates them in the book. But not if we stand on the sidelines. The Constitution, again, is not self-executing. It needs us to carry out its mandates.
So that's my question. Two questions. Do you think we make it through the next month without civil unrest? And what do you say to a room of 300-400 people? What does it mean to execute the Constitution? What are you calling on us to do?
Respect the principles of the Constitution, the separation of powers. Everybody understand what that is? That we're not a united government like a parliamentary system in Europe where, basically all the power is with the prime minister and his party because they've got the majority in the parliament, and the judiciary is basically an arm of the executive. We have a separate legislative branch at the federal level, that's our Congress, executive branch, of course, the office of the president, and judicial branch. And they're to do, there's some overlap, but they're to do basically different things. The most neglected word, I promise you, the most overlooked and neglected word in the entire Constitution is the very first word of the very first sentence of the very first article of the Constitution. I don't know how we miss it, because it's right there. After the preamble, which says what we're going to do, when we start actually doing it, Article 1, Sentence 1, Word 1 is the word all. A-L-L. All. All legislative power herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States consisting of a House of Representatives and a Senate. Now, who today can honestly say that it is, at the federal level, our Congress exercising all legislative power? It doesn't say most, it doesn't say much, it says all. We know the reality is that much legislative power has been grabbed or abdicated by the courts on one side, judicial legislation from the bench. The current Supreme Court's trying to do something about that. And by the executive on the other side. The imperial presidency, with the president basically exercising legislative authority, is utterly alien to the principles of the Constitution. Why do we put up with it? Well, one reason we do is most of our citizens don't know enough about our own civic life to realize that we've got a problem there. I hope we can rectify that. That's what civic education is about. I mentioned earlier when you asked me privately about what I was occupying my time doing. An awful lot of my time now is devoted to renewing American civic education, building programs in private universities, including religiously affiliated universities, but also in public universities, states like Florida and Texas and North Carolina, Arizona, and most recently Ohio, modeled on our Madison program at Princeton, to give us what we really need, which is an informed citizenry who knows the principles of its Constitution, so it can stand up and defend the principles of the Constitution. It was Madison who said that only a well-instructed people can be permanently a free people. And he was absolutely right about that. Truer words were never spoken. You can have a poorly instructed people that can flourish under a benign monarch, if you happen to have the good luck to have a benign king, a benign despot. You cannot have a flourishing people that is ignorant, especially of its own civic principles, in a democratic republic, in what we today call a democracy. Our founders favored the term republic. You can't have that. If you have an ill-educated, an ill-instructed, a poorly instructed people on civic matters, when those people are supposed to govern themselves and not be governed by a king or an aristocracy or something like that, we're in trouble. So we really need a revitalization and renewal of our civic education.
So I want to step into your work with the Madison program, and talk about higher education for a second. But before we get there, let me ask you about freedom of speech. So we have a Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, among other things, that guarantees us the ability to speak, to not be censored by the government. There's restrictions on it, but you have a reputation as being a free speech absolutist or close to it. So
I prefer the term fundamentalist.
Fundamentalist, okay.
Free speech fundamentalist.
A free speech fundamentalist, okay. I read, before you came, I read a number of things. You obviously get critiqued a lot from the left. You get critiqued a lot from the right when it comes to this. There's a lot of people making comments about Death to America or anti-Semitic comments, then you were defending their right to make these statements.
Yeah, the arrows you see on this side of my body sticking out, those are from the left, and this side is from the right. So I'm getting plenty of arrows.
I get them in the back.
In the back.
I never get them in the front.
I sort of prefer the ones from the right because they do come from the front. At least they hit you right in
My take is that criticism from the right is mean, and criticism from the left is condescending.
Yeah, there you go.
And I don't like either side, but whatever. So
I do a lot of work.
Freedom of speech.
I do a lot of work on this issue with my beloved friend and teaching partner Cornel West. Now a candidate for president, of course. Professor West and I began teaching together in 2005. He then went on from Princeton up to Harvard and now is at Union Theological Seminary. So we don't have opportunities except occasionally when he gets a leave and he comes back to Princeton.
And you have a book coming out together.
We have a book coming out. Yeah. Oh, good advertisement. Good job. Yeah. January 21st, day after the inauguration. I'm assuming Cornell won't be inaugurated that day, but day after the inauguration.
There's questions about how the race will be decided, but I don't think it's with Cornell being involved.
So January 21st, our book, which is entitled Truth Matters, and the subtitle is Fruitful Disagreement in an Age of Division, will be published by Post Hill Press. And I hope it will do a little good in promoting the idea that people who deeply disagree, as Professor West and I do. If you know anything about Professor West, he's a man of the pretty hard left. He's honorary chairman of the, the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. And I am not honorary chairman of the Democratic Socialists of America. So we really disagree. But, we share a Christian faith, and we share a commitment to old-fashioned civil libertarian principles like freedom of speech. I want him to have every right to articulate principles that are contrary to my own. I want him to have every right to be critical of me and to say why I'm wrong about stuff. And I just want the same right to be critical of him and say why he's wrong about that stuff. And I think if we do things that way, where I respect his right and he respects my right, and we go beyond simply listening to each other politely or not stepping on each other when we're trying to speak or not shouting at each other and actually listen to each other, because after all, no matter how convinced we are that we're right, we frail, fallen, fallible human beings can be wrong. And we can be wrong not only about the minor, trivial, superficial things of life, but also about the big, important things of life. So I think we have something to learn from each other, despite our deep disagreements. I think if we, as a country, could learn to do that, we would be much better off. We'd have a much better chance of keeping this republic.
So, I don't know Dr. West. He gave a lecture 20 years ago, and I disagreed profoundly with what he said, and I went to the microphone to challenge him, and I backed away because he was calling for a national committee to redistribute wealth, and it had turned into a rock concert. I mean, he had the ability to just whip the crowd up, and I thought, he's going to make me look like an idiot, and I'm not going to get out of here alive. So I just backed away from the microphone and said, I'll write him and send him a note.
That doesn't go on in that kind of thing does not go on in our conversations. I think that's very good. I mean, neither of us plays, when we're discussing and debating together, neither of us plays for the audience approval. We don't want to get, applause and shouts. And that's what we're trying to engage deep issues on which we both care deeply, but we just have different points of view, and I want to give my reasons, I want to listen to his reasons, and he wants to give his reasons, he wants to listen to my reasons. And we're not trying to rile anybody up, we're trying to get people to think.
Okay, but that's not the reputation of higher education at this moment.
And that reputation is deserved, or the lack of reputation is deserved, because higher education is not doing that at the moment. Much too often, what we have are monologues on our campus rather than dialogues. There's one point of view, and on most university campuses, you know what point of view that is. It's not only dominant, it is rigorously enforced. And it's very difficult for students or faculty members, even tenured faculty members, to express dissent from that point of view. Very often people are punished in formal or informal ways.
Because it's not the law that prevents people from speaking up in that situation.
Because we have a First Amendment.
It's the culture. It's
Exactly.
the pressure. It's cancel culture. It's whatever it is.
Yeah.
So so talk about the Madison program and how you have cultivated free expression, advocacy, the kind of open dialogue that you and Dr. West have.
Well, I arrived at Princeton back in the Middle Ages, as you noticed, 40 years, as you said, 40 years, or as Ben said, 40 years ago. I remember it was like it was yesterday, Bob. I mean, it was fall of 1985, and I arrived on campus, and out of the closet Christian conservative. I quickly discovered I was the only one there. There may have been others in the closet, but I was the only one out of the closet. Maybe I was the only one, being a hick from West Virginia, I was the only one who didn't know you weren't supposed to say that you're a Christian conservative or express views that challenged the dominant orthodoxy on campus. But I did it, and God bless my old school, in those days we still had them, they're like dinosaurs today, but those old school liberals who really did disagree with me about very important issues, but nevertheless respected my freedom of speech. I have never been a victim. Now, I know conservatives in academia who have been victims. I know lots of them, but I've been blessed. I have never been a victim. Princeton knew what they were getting when they hired me. In my job talk before they even hired me, I made clear where I stood on the most controversial issues. But nevertheless, they hired me. They granted me tenure. They then installed me in the McCormick professorship, one of the most legendary, celebrated endowed chairs in the university, and then permitted me to found and build into a big powerhouse on campus, the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions. That was in the year 2000. So I had 15 years of experience realizing, one, that our students, brilliant as they were, 1560 SAT scores, class valedictorians, didn't know the first thing about American civics. This was a failure of high schools, but they didn't know the first thing about American civics. I was doing remedial work with some of the most brilliant and gifted and learned students in the country. So that was number one. Number two, I looked around at what else was going on in the university, and I found that, in so many cases, with so many professors, students were being taught to have contempt for their country. Not just for its faults, but for its principles. People were being taught to have contempt for the great traditions of thought and faith that made possible this great civil liberty that we all enjoy, not to mention the tremendous material benefits of a prosperous economy. So instead of celebrating Athens and Jerusalem, the great traditions of philosophy and faith, these were held in contempt, and students were being taught that sophisticated people aren't patriotic, and sophisticated people aren't religious, and sophisticated people don't believe that there's anything much to say on behalf of the great streams of thought that we compendiously refer to as the Western tradition. And I thought, I tell a different story in my classes. I don't indoctrinate my students, but I make sure that they understand what's to be said for Athens and Jerusalem and for the American founding and for the Declaration and for the Constitution. But it was just me. So I thought we needed more than that. And that was the impetus. Those two things were the impetus to create the Madison program. And God bless our then president, Harold Shapiro, and his provost, Jeremiah Ostreicher, wonderful men, old school liberals, who said, yeah, the students should be hearing a broader perspective or set of perspectives on these fundamental issues. And so we were able to build the Madison program. And the old real estate line, build it and they will come, turned out to be true. We built it and they came. Last year, Princeton's a small university. I don't know if any of you have been there. I know some of you have been. We're a liberal arts college pretending to be a big university. We're Williams masquerading as Harvard. There are only 7,500, right, Bob? 7,500 students, including our graduate students. Well, last year we had 265 undergraduate fellows of the James Madison program. If we were a major, we'd be one of the largest, if not the largest major on campus. So there's a big market. Students want to learn. It's not their fault that nobody is teaching them. They want to learn. So that's what we did.
And in this environment, you were not only teaching them the Constitution and introducing them to Western Civ and helping them understand the great principles, you are also cultivating an environment in which you can rigorously disagree, but there has to be civic dialogue.
Bet. That is absolutely what we're doing. We're trying to model it for the rest of the university and for higher education more broadly. And we're trying to spread this little gospel.
And this is what is now being picked up at other schools. You're giving much of your time now to helping other institutions, public and private, start these little enclaves to have higher education as we understood it.
And at the state universities, they're not so little, these enclaves. The Hamilton Center, modeled on the Madison program at University of Florida, just hired this year 23 faculty members, tenured and tenure track, and will be hiring 25 in the coming year. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a big program. There'll be a similarly big program at the University of Texas, Austin, the Civitas program, the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership, Arizona State, the new School of Civic Life and Leadership at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. They will end up with 50 or more faculty members and a big student draw. Ohio State, the Salmon P. Chase Center for Civics, Culture, and Society. University of Tennessee, Knoxville, the Institute for Civic Affairs. This is a very exciting time right now for civic education. And I haven't even mentioned what's going on in many of the private universities where programs modeled on the Madison program have been founded and are flourishing and growing. So those are reasons not only for hope but for optimism.
I am thrilled, and I'm also frustrated. When I went through high school, I was in the first class that didn't have Western Civ. We had World Civ. I didn't know what that meant. Didn't really understand that for 15 years. And then suddenly I sort of trip into this. I got to figure out this Western Civ thing. What exactly is that? And very frustrated to go, oh, there's all these books I should have been reading. Oh, there's all these ideas that I should have been tracking with. This is Jerusalem and Athens. This is a thing. This has its expression in America with this unique experiment and all these. So, yeah, there's a lot of people that don't know about what they don't know about.
Yeah, it's the unknown unknowns, as the late Don Rumsfeld said. Now, remember, in promoting American civic education, or more broadly, Western Civ, that is not to take anything away from the great value of studying other civilizations. I am all for it. I myself, when I was a student, did a very careful study of Southeast Asian Buddhism, Theravada. It's called the Theravada tradition of Buddhism. I had the great pleasure and honor, really, of studying with a very distinguished scholar who was a Buddhist monk from Chiang Mai, Thailand. And I learned an enormous amount, and it was valuable. There's much to be appreciated in non-Western traditions. And so let's do that.
No disagreement.
But why would we belittle, why would we hold in contempt our own historic traditions, which have produced civil liberty unknown in the history of the world, that have produced prosperity unknown in the history of the world?
So I want to get to freedom of religion, but one more question about freedom of speech. So in the last month, I saw that the arguments about all the social media companies and the disinformation and this call that we've got to, and it's not by insignificant people, former presidential candidates, senators, others saying, we have to rethink freedom of speech because we have to be able to police essentially the news, and we have to be able to diminish the false information. I mean, I thought, this is like I'm reading Orwell here.
Yeah.
And are you worried about this? I mean, again, I mean, Hillary Clinton is making the argument, John Kerry's making the argument. These are, and I'm not sure who else is making the argument, but those are two very prominent, powerful people.
I'm terrified about it. It's exactly the opposite of the message that we need to be sending, which is a message that encourages the robust exchange of ideas, the freedom of people to put forward their ideas, their thoughts, their arguments, and challenge other people and in turn be challenged. There will always be a temptation, for the sake of truth, to immunize or vaccinate people against certain ideas that we regard as bad, as untruthful. In the end, though, that does not serve the cause of truth. It undermines the cause of truth. It undermines the cause of truth-seeking. The most reliable way to get at the truth is by allowing everybody to hear the best that has been thought and said on all sides of the question. The reason we should believe in and protect and promote freedom of speech and the robust exchange of ideas is not because there is no truth. Quite the opposite. It's because there is a truth. It's terribly important that we get to the truth. And the best way and only reliable way to get to the truth is to let the power of the truth win out in the free exchange of ideas. Now, there are some legitimate, even a fundamentalist like me realizes there are some legitimate restrictions on speech. For example, there are some categories of speech under our First Amendment that are not protected. Genuine threats, harassment and intimidation, incitement, deliberate incitement to immediate or imminent violence, slander and libel, false advertising. These have historically always been considered outside the protections of free speech, and that's fine, and that's good. Beyond those, there are certain time, place, and manner regulations of speech. And those too are fine, so long as they're content neutral. By time, place, and manner regulations, constitutional scholars mean the following. You shouldn't be allowed, as a municipality say, to restrict a truck, a sound truck, coming through the downtown section of the city a couple of days before the election, blaring out, vote for the Democrats or vote for the Republicans. In that setting, it's not reasonable to restrict that speech. But it's perfectly reasonable to restrict that same sound truck blaring out those same messages at 3 in the morning in a residential neighborhood. The key thing is that it be content neutral, that the same rules apply to the Democrats as to the Republicans, the socialists as the libertarians, and so forth. But that should be it. You know, beyond that, as our Supreme Court has historically held, conservatives and liberals, and over time, beyond that, speech should be free. For the sake of truth. One more word about colleges and universities?
Sure.
Okay. One thing we really need to have an intense allergy to is indoctrination. That is, where students are spoon-fed one set of ideas and are not allowed even to hear about or consider competing ideas. Certainly at private universities that hold themselves accountable to First Amendment values, even though they don't technically have to because they're private, and certainly at public universities, indoctrination should be absolutely out of the question. When I speak at religiously affiliated universities, whether they're Christian or Jewish, I've even been out to the Muslim one, the new Muslim university out in Berkeley, California, Zaytuna College. I have the same message. Yes, religious universities have a dual mandate. They're to promote the faith as well as to promote general learning. And yes, that means that the free speech rules will be different in some significant ways for religiously affiliated universities. But even there, if you're Notre Dame, if you're Wheaton, if you're Yeshiva in New York, the Jewish university, if you're Zaytuna, the Muslim university, you're not doing your job as a university if you try to shield your students from ever hearing criticisms of the faith. If a student is majoring in philosophy, I don't care whether it's at the University of Florida, Princeton University, Wheaton College, Notre Dame, Yeshiva, or Zaytuna, that student needs to know what Nietzsche said about Christianity, why Nietzsche rejected Christianity, and what's to be said against Nietzsche's critique of Christianity. You are not an educated person. You do not deserve the title of a philosophy major if you don't know Nietzsche's critique of Christianity. So even in religiously affiliated institutions, there needs to be a broad range of freedom for the expression of ideas, of the consideration of arguments. But in one fun, I'm sorry to preach, but this is what I tell my liberal colleagues.
The Sunday after the election, you're welcome to be
back.
here.
Yeah. So this is my message, not so much to my, when I just told you what I say when I'm visiting religiously affiliated colleges. So when I'm visiting places like the one at which I work, Princeton, or I'm at Harvard or Stanford or state universities, where the overwhelmingly dominant ethos is secular and liberal, and we have the problem of indoctrination. My message there is, you know what? Indoctrination not only is not education, so don't confuse them. If you're indoctrinating your students, don't tell me you're educating them. Education not only is indoctrination not education, it is the very antithesis of education. I would much rather my students be ignorant than they be indoctrinated. If they're ignorant, I might be able to teach them something. But if they're indoctrinated before I can ever get around to teaching them something, get them to consider arguments on competing sides, I have to pry their minds open with a crowbar, and that's very difficult to do.
So I have 2 minutes, and I have like 8 more categories to
You
talk
go ahead.
about. So let me just ask this about staying with the First Amendment, freedom of religion. So I get people sending me notes once a week about, that we're losing our religious freedoms, Christians are being persecuted, I'm going to get arrested for hate speech if I hold to a traditional sexual ethic, case studies here and there. And I understand that, but I also, when I follow the courts to the extent that I do, it seems like the last 4 or 5 years, all the religious liberty cases have gone in the direction I would like them to go. And my friends on the left are always screaming at me that we're moving into a theocracy and that freedom of religion is the card that gets, I can do whatever I want. So what's the truth about our status? Are you worried that we're going to lose religious freedoms?
Okay. So, as Ben kindly noted in that very generous introduction, for which I thank you, Ben, I served for a couple of terms as chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. I also served back in the 90s on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, which had among its mandates the consideration of issues of religious freedom. From those experiences, I can certainly tell you.
I think in the 90s I was playing flag football.
You were playing flag football, yeah, you were a kid, yeah. You think I dye my hair this color? No. So, I can tell you this much. We have a measure of religious freedom in this country that is the envy of the world. And even on our worst days, we're not experiencing what Tibetan Buddhists experience in China, or house Christians experience in China, or what Uyghurs experience, or what Rohingya Muslims experience in Myanmar, or what Christians experience in Nigeria or Somalia or Sudan. So we need to bear that in mind. But that shouldn't prevent us from calling out violations, genuine violations of religious freedom right here in our own democratic republic. If someone is forced to say, contrary to his conscience and his faith, that a man is a woman or a woman is a man, that's a serious imposition. That's a serious violation of religious freedom. It's incompatible with our First Amendment values. And there are similar violations carried out all the time, especially in universities. Of all places, you would think that's where we should have the most robust religious freedom. But often that's where people feel least free to speak their minds, whether we're talking about public universities or private universities. The polling data, the survey data on this couldn't be clearer, and it is depressing. We find a majority of students, and not just conservative students, even liberal students, saying that they engage in self-censorship. And it's not only students, it's faculty members. And here's the thing I really don't get. It includes tenured faculty members. People like me. We've got the most secure jobs in the country except for the federal judiciary. We've got life tenure. And yet, so many of my colleagues, even with tenure, are afraid to say what they really think on campus. Usually in cases where what they really think isn't nearly as offensive to the majority as what I really think and say all the time. But there we are. And that's a bad situation for truth-seeking. These institutions cannot carry out their mission as truth-seeking institutions. No matter what the words on the page say, no matter what the formal rules are, how protective they are of our civil liberties, if we don't have what you might call a culture of freedom that enables people genuinely to be free, to feel free, to speak their minds, to make their arguments, to challenge the established orthodoxies and understandings.
I have one more question, and then I'm going to open it up because we've got questions that have been coming in. So, in the last 6 months, maybe 9 months now, I am hearing about academics at secular institutions who are pivoting towards faith. And in some cases, I think it is simply they're seeing the bankruptcy of secularism, and they realize that it's not going to hold, and that Western civ is, that Western civ is going to be protected only if there's freedom of religion and if there is robust Christian presence. I think that's what some of them are thinking. And not many of them initially are articulating anything like an Apostles' Creed Christianity, although some of them eventually seem to. And I can look around, I can talk myself into a belief that we are headed towards revival, that two things are going to happen simultaneously. One is that we're going to have more, the church is going to have to learn how to be more of a subculture, more of a counterculture than a subculture. There's going to be more pressure. There's going to be less cultural winds in our back. They're going to be in our face. And at the same time, I think we may see lots of people who say, okay, I went down this path. I'm actually going to look at Jesus more seriously. Is that happening? Are you seeing that? Do you sense that?
All right, first I just want to finish up because I realize I didn't actually fully answer your last question. You pointed to those victories in the Supreme Court for religious freedom. Religious freedom used to lose consistently in the Supreme Court. For decades, religious freedom claims would lose unless they could be transposed into different kinds of claims. Typically, those of us who litigated would transpose a religious freedom claim into a free speech claim because we had a better chance of winning. That's now shifted. These victories are real. The Becket Fund, which is one of the two, along with the Alliance Defending Freedom, one of the two top religious freedom litigation public interest firms in the country. The Becket Fund now has 12 victories in a row, 12 without a loss. That's pretty good pitching, right? In the Supreme Court of the United States, with more victories to come. We have a very good court for religious freedom right now. We should be grateful about that, and we should certainly make hay while the sun shines. Okay, so now to your question about are at least some secularists starting to have second thoughts? The answer to that is clearly yes. Now, you've probably heard about two people who happen to be old friends of mine, people I've known for many years, who've said interesting things on that. One is Richard Dawkins, who was my colleague when I was the law tutor early in my career at New College of Oxford University. It's called New College, but it was new in 1379. Dawkins now famously said that he regards himself as a cultural Christian. What's that? Now, he's at pains to say, now, that doesn't mean I believe the metaphysical stuff, that there's a personal God in heaven and all. I don't believe that. But I am shaped in my fundamental values in ways that I consider to be positive. He probably just had to stop himself from saying, thank God. By the principles of Christianity. But for those principles, I would be believing terrible stuff about how it's right to oppress other people, that Alexander the Great was really great. Why was he great? Because greatness consists in conquering and dominating other people, and nobody can do it like old Alexander. That's a really important, I don't want to be in debate mode and say admission. It's a really important insight or thought for Dawkins to formulate, and it was good of him to be willing to say it. He recognizes that much that is good, that he values in his own life and in the civilization, in the culture he lives in, is the fruit of Christianity. It didn't come out of nowhere. It comes from the Bible, from biblical faith. The other is Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Ayaan was born to a fundamentalist Muslim family in Sudan, and she was being forced in. She was a victim of female genital mutilation. She was being forced into a marriage that she didn't want. She fled. She escaped. She rejected then not only her Muslim faith, but all religion. She declared herself to be an atheist. She ended up in Holland, where she ended up being a member of parliament and a controversial public figure. When one of her colleagues with whom she worked was murdered, Theo van Gogh, she was herself at great risk and under threat. She came to the United States, where now she's lived for many, many years. She's now married to the historian Neil Ferguson, and they have some children. And she announced that she had repudiated her atheism, that she had had a spiritual awakening, and she now regards herself not merely as a cultural Christian, but as a real Christian. What's similar about the two cases is, although they are now somebody who believes in God and then somebody who still doesn't believe in God, in both cases, the route to where they are now is through the cultural and moral achievements of Christianity. Ayaan asked herself the question, why do we believe in love? Why should we believe in love, not hate? Service rather than domination. Why should we believe that people should be kind, should be generous? Why do we believe that people have fundamental human rights? Why do we think that people should be treated as ends in themselves and honored with dignity rather than as means to our purposes? Said, because of Christianity. But that doesn't make sense unless Christianity is true. So it took her across that borderline into actual faith. But at a certain level, Michael, this is not something new. Just look at my own field of philosophy. If you look at some of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, some of the just magisterial figures, anybody who's out there who has studied philosophy in college will know some of these names. Elizabeth Anscombe at Oxford and Cambridge, Peter Geach, Nicholas Rescher, John Finnis, my doctoral supervisor, Nicholas Rescher, Alistair MacIntyre. All of those figures were converts to the Christian faith from secularism. And this is going back into the 1940s. This is nothing new. Right here in Chicago, the late and very great and dearly beloved Jean Bethke Elshtain of the University of Chicago. Elizabeth Fox Genovese from Emory University. So it didn't just start happening yesterday. This has been going on really for quite some time. Now, at one level, it's just God speaking to people's hearts. At another level, it's serious truth-seeking people, laying aside all the prejudices and all the dogmas and all the ideologies and just trying to look at things straight on, who looking at things straight on an intellectual path, end up in faith. People come, I'm sure this is true in your experience, people come to faith in different ways. For some people, it's moral insight that brings them to faith. For other people, they come to faith and their moral views change only because they came to faith. Those are opposite directions, but they both end up with people who didn't have faith having faith. For some, it's a highly intellectual exercise. For others, it's an affair of the heart. Another one of the great philosophers of the 20th century, Bastian von Frossen, the great philosopher of science. I knew him slightly when he was at Princeton before his retirement. His account of his conversion story. Now, this is a great philosopher of science. His account was, I can't explain it. I fell in love with Jesus. How do you explain being in love? Very different from the highly rationalistic account that some of those other philosophers would give you. Anyway, there we are.
One question is all we're going to be able to take, and then
Oh, no.
Dr. George has
Don't stop on my account.
another-
I'm enjoying this.
Well, we're just going to demand that you come back, I think is what's going to happen. But
So many of you submitted excellent questions, but I guess there's going to be a lucky lottery winner. We'll go with this one. It seems like most of American problems are framed in political terms. What are alternative ways to frame the challenges of today that might allow people to see issues without a partisan lens?
Well, our most fundamental issues are cultural. Now, that is not to say that they do not have political dimensions. And if somebody wants just to be able to dismiss politics or political concerns or lay those aside, I'm the wrong guy to ask, because I don't see a way to do that. The political issues are intertwined with the cultural issues. But that doesn't mean that the issues aren't even more fundamentally cultural than they are political. The breakdown of the family. This is probably the most important issue in the country. Family dissolution, failure of family formation, collapse of marriage rates, collapse of population. There's only a limited amount that government can do to help that. Unfortunately, government can do a lot more to hurt it, and government is doing a lot more to hurt it. So on the political side of that, there's both a negative and a positive. Government needs to be doing more good stuff, but even if it can't do that, it should stop doing the bad stuff. But then, even apart from that, there's the cultural dimension of the issue. And that is work to be done in civil society. By civil society, I mean all the units of society that are not the government. So the church, the family, first of all, the family, the most fundamental unit, the basic cell of civil society. Next, the church and the religious community. Then everything else, all the civic associations, fraternal organizations, educational organizations, the Campfire Girls and the 4-H and the coach and the teacher and the pastor. I mean, this is what shapes the culture fundamentally. And all of those institutions and all of those persons, grandma and grandpa, auntie and uncle, mom and dad, pastor, teacher, coach, have a role to play precisely in that most fundamental of all problems. There are additional problems too, but those most fundamental being the problem of the family, encouraging proper family formation and guarding against family dissolution. And I've got bad news for you. This is not, people are not going to want to hear this. I have to tell you anyway. There's no way you fix this problem without rolling back the sexual revolution. There's no way. I'm sorry. I'd love to do it. I'd love to give you the magic pill. We can keep the sexual revolution and have healthy family structures and healthy family formation. That's just not the way it works. The sexual revolution, as even secular figures like Mary Harrington and Louise Perry have now very publicly stated, and these are women really worth listening to. If you don't know those names, Mary Harrington and Louise Perry, go on the internet and go to YouTube and find interviews with them. What they're saying is absolutely true. Unless sexual morality is restored in the United States or in the broader Western culture, we cannot have the goodies of strong, faithful, intact families with all that means for children.
thank you for that and for everything else that you have said. Here's the reality. The children are going to get let out in a few minutes, and they're going to ravage the cookies that everybody here is counting on. So we do need to end. I'm going to ask 2 questions, and you're limited to 30-second answers.
Oh, okay. The lightning round, they call it.
The lightning round.
Yeah.
What is on your nightstand right now? What are you reading?
I'm reading Alan, my dear colleague, the historian Alan Gelzo's a book on Gettysburg. I've been meaning to read it for some time, but he's a wonderful scholar of Lincoln and the Civil War, and I'm looking forward to reading that.
What are you writing? What's your next project? You have a book coming out?
Well, just completing the
West.
book with Cornell West that will be published on January 21st. I'm also putting together, putting the final touches on a collection of my essays from the past 10 years, and that will be appearing, that's published by Encounter Books under the title Seeking Truth, Speaking Truth. I see the vocation of a teacher. It's really a book that tries to.
You're going to go past 30 seconds.
I'm going to go past
feel
30. It's meant to embody my vision of what my vocation is as a teacher. What's your vocation as a teacher? I think the role of any teacher is to form the students entrusted by their families to our charge to be determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers. And that's why I've titled the book, Seeking Truth, Speaking Truth.
I handed out one of your books about 5 years ago for Christmas presents to lots of people. So everybody should know all these topics, including the ones we did not get to, Dr. George has written or YouTube lectures or interviewed. There's a treasure trove of information that comes from this man. Ben, you want to come up and close us? Let's first give Dr. George.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, that's too sweet. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So stay here.
All right, Dr. George, I'd like to give you just one more opportunity. Anything, we had just a few minutes here, but anything you'd like to say just in closing? In this moment, here we are, we've had a lot of questions, but to audience here, just what would you like to say in a closing word to us?
The task before us as Americans, as Christians, is one from which no one is exempt. There's no one who doesn't have a role to play in restoring, healing, getting our culture into the shape that we need it to be in if we're to honor those fundamental principles, the principle of the inherent and equal dignity of each and every member of the human family, where we're really being honest with ourselves when we do say that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. There's no one who's exempt. There's no one who doesn't have a role to play. It's not just for intellectuals. It's not just for politicians. It's not just for pastors. It's for everybody. It's for parents. It's for aunties and uncles and grandmas and grandpas. It's for members of church communities. There's one thing we all need to do. This is the common one. We'd have different vocations. Some of us are in the political dimension of the thing, some of us in the intellectual dimension of the thing. The one thing that absolutely everybody can do is pray. And it's the most powerful and the most important thing. So we can all do that. But then beyond that, each of us has to be asking himself or herself, what am I being called to do in this cause? It could be financial, it could be personal involvement, it could be in the educational sphere, it could be in the political sphere. What is God calling me to do? What's my role? That's got to be discerned by each of us. Nobody can tell you what it is. Only you can figure out what it is in your prayer. But there's nobody who doesn't have a role to play.
Yeah, what a perfect way to end. As Mike said, there are 100 kids that are being educated and learning their Bibles at different parts of